Shabbat Shalom. So in the spirit of the words I offered at the beginning of the Torah reading about opening ourselves up to being renewed and transformed, I want to share with you today an insight which I think will probably be new to many of you, a piece of wisdom that you may not yet have encountered, one I submit to you of the most difficult teachings that I have ever encountered, but also one of the most powerful ones. A comment on the story of our liberation from Egypt, a story that may or may not have happened millennia ago, but is most definitely happening once again in our own times, as our people fights to free itself from the forces of hatred that threaten our physical and our spiritual as well as our moral safety. It's an ancient story whose truth transcends any debate about whether it actually happened, leaving us timeless lessons to learn about what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a Jew, and on this Shabbat of love, what it means to love our fellow human beings. We're taught Kol ha'omer davar b'shem omro mevi ge'ula le'olam, that one who teaches something in the name of the one from whom you heard it said first helps to bring a little bit of redemption to the world. Alavai, Ken Yehi Ratzon, I will share with you that I heard this teaching first from Dr. Susanna Heschel, the daughter of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, at a solidarity study gathering that was convened by Yeshivat Chovevei Torah in New York in the first days of the war in Ukraine. The opening verse of our parasha reads, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe bo el Paro ki ani hichbadeti et libo ve'et lev avodav lema'an shiti ototai ele bikirbo. Hashem says to Moshe, come to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers in order that I may display these signs among them. The Hasidic master, the Kedushat Levi, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, teaches that there is a new element in the story of the Exodus that is raised by two new phrases in this one single opening verse. The phrase Bo el Paro, which I translated come to Paro, not go to Paro, as we saw in many earlier references in this story. And most importantly, in the phrase Ki ani hichbadeti et lev Paro, the word hichbadeti appearing instead of the word hechezakti, in order to convey that God hardened Paro's heart. What do these changes mean, and what do they add to the story? The Kedushat Levi talks about there having been two reasons for the plagues at all. One is to punish and to teach accountability. And the other is to motivate deeper awareness of God, deeper awareness of the presence of holiness in this world, and to be inspired to make better choices, to inspire among the Mitzrayim, among the Egyptians, to make better choices, to inspire Paro to choose differently when he's given an opportunity to let Am Yisrael go. Both of those notions are contained within the verse, but the second, more challenging idea of remaining open to someone's capacity for change is reflected in the textual changes themselves. That Bo el Paro, come to Paro, instead of Lech, go to Paro, as I explained last night in my teaching at Kabbalat Shabbat, invites us, or invites Moshe, and by extension us, to consider what it might mean to approach even those who are our enemies, not in the spirit of hostile confrontation, but with an open heart, with an awareness of the possibility of change, even in those who we could never imagine that being possible. And then, hichbadeti, instead of hechezakti. So much ink has been spilled trying to understand how we could possibly reconcile our belief in free will with so many references to God hardening Paro's heart. How could Paro possibly have made a free decision whether to release or continue to enslave Bnei Israel if God is manipulating his heart, hardening it, making it less compassionate, less possible for him to respond with anything other than the dictates of oppression. And here, the Kedushat Levi offers us, I think, one of the hardest lessons I have ever been asked to learn. He reads the words, Ki ani hichbadati et leiv paro, which is easily translated as, for I have hardened Pharaoh's heart, as if it isn't saying anything different than vehechazakti leiv paro. He reads it very differently. He reads the word hichbadati, not coming from the root, the shoresh kaved, as made it heavy, but from the shoresh of the word kavod, dignity, respect. God restores in that phrase, Ki ani hichbadati et leiv paro. God restores Paro's own dignity in his capacity to see himself as someone who can make different, better choices. He honors Pharaoh's heart by acknowledging with these words that should he choose, he could choose to be an agent not of cruelty, but an agent of love. This is so hard to understand. How do we be open to somebody even as cruel as Paro, reversing course, changing the evil of their ways? How can we possibly listen to this lesson now as we are in the midst of a war when our enemies have inflicted unspeakable suffering upon us and who have sworn that they will do it over and over and over again if given the chance? And yet, the Kedushat Levi is asking us, if God can be open to an evil person changing their ways and making different choices, mustn't we be similarly open? Seriously, I want to say. I'm lying. Seriously, I want to scream. You really expect me to take that lesson? It's hard to even say the words. You expect me to believe that Hamas terrorists may one day be enlightened enough and realize the evil of their ways and suddenly want to make different choices? You really expect me to entertain that thought? I'm angry at the Kedushat Levi. Don't teach me this Torah. I can't handle this Torah. Even as we continue to put the lives of our young people at risk every single day to protect our country, to protect our people. Even as the friends of my children continue to go to the funerals of their young friends every single week, including this past one. In the current war, triggered of course by the massacre on October 7th, can we really summon the notion of perhaps one of the smartest people I know, the criminal justice reform activist Brian Stevenson, and really believe that people are more than the worst thing they've ever done? Let's take it down a notch. Let's take it down a notch. We're living in extreme times, and so we consider these pieces of Torah against the backdrop of the extreme circumstances that we have to contend with. But as I've been trying to do in the Shabbatot that I'm honored to be here with you, I can't help but speak about what's happening in our world and in Eretz Yisrael. But I've been trying to distill from the lessons of the Torah not only insights into how we can understand this time in our history, but also what it says to us as human beings in our own battles for righteousness and for peace. And so let me take a few minutes and try to unpack with you what this teaching, difficult as it is, could mean for us in the spaces of our own lives. We started studying together in the shiurim that I've been offering a series on everyday ethics. Last Wednesday night, we looked at the question of whether we can separate the art from the artist, whether we can, with a sense of moral integrity, choose to listen to the music or read the novels of artists accused of or even indicted of gross ethical violations like sexual assault or racist, anti-Semitic, or anti-Zionist screeds. And we wrestled with Jewish texts reminding us that people are complicated and people make horrible choices for all kinds of reasons, including, if I may humbly remind us, our own ancestors, as the opening book of the Torah and Sefer Bereshit illustrates for us over and over again. Even the lineage of Mashiach ben David, of the Mashiach himself, comes from incest on the one side and prostitution on the other. We are not immune to making, shall we say, questionable choices. Yes, judgment and accountability are critical to fostering righteousness and to building a just society. But we as Jews are also summoned to believe that in every human being lies the capacity for tshuva. In every human being, no matter how far they've strayed, lies the possibility of coming home after they have strayed far, even grotesquely far. Teshuvah, we are taught, was created even before the creation of the world, as if the Kadosh Baruch Hu knew that human life could not exist for a nanosecond without the spiritual technology to repair our broken bonds when we inevitably hurt each other. But the Kedushat Levi is trying to tell us in his reading of Ki ani hichbadati et lev Paro, for I have dignified Paro's heart, is that when we fail to see people in their full complexity, even our enemies in life, we are hardening our own hearts. We are enslaving ourselves to anger and to resentment. There is a lot of venomous speech out there today. A lot. About us, to be sure. There is also a lot of venomous speech from among us about a lot of other people. There are those who deserve that venomous speech. But there are those who don't. Notice that Paro, the word Paro, is spelled Pei, Resh, Ayin, Hey, such that the word for evil is actually written out in the two center letters of his name. Ra, Resh, Ayin. Ra can mean evil, which makes sense in this character, Paro. But curiously, those two letters also form another Hebrew word, fellow, neighbor, Reah. As in the iconic verse from Vayikra, Lo tikom v'lo titor et b'nei amecha ve'ahavta l're'acha kamocha. Love your fellow as you love yourself. Now, it's probably the case that long ago, the people who were your neighbors were likely people very much like you. Living in the tent next door, they probably came from, if not the same tribe, from certainly the same network of tribe, from the same people, living a very similar life. But what the Torah here, I think, is really trying to teach us is that loving our fellow is not just about loving people who are physically close to you or who look or who behave just like you. And certainly our world today is not a world where the people living next door to us are people just like us. We live next door to people who are very different from us, who may look different, who may believe differently than we do. And as Rabbi Joachim Prince, a really incredibly courageous rabbi who gave a speech, the March on Washington in August of 1963, just before Dr. King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech, Rabbi Prince taught that the commandment to love your neighbor is teaching us something about the word neighbor. That neighbor, he taught, is not a geographical term. It's not about physical proximity. Love your neighbor, he taught, is a summoning to us to love all human beings, even those who are physically and even those who are morally distanced from us. We are commanded to love those who are ra, those who are bad, who make bad choices, just as we love ourselves when we make room for our own ra, for our own bad choices, just as we accept within us the capacity to fail, just as we accept within us that I've done things that I am not particularly proud of, that I have hurt people. I have been cruel, just like all of you. And yet we make room for self-love and self-acceptance. And the Torah, amazingly enough, frustratingly enough, terrifyingly enough, is asking us to do the same for others. In that famous verse from Vayikra, "Ve'ahavta l're'echa kamocha," we are commanded to love the Ra within us, liberating ourselves from self-hate. And when we liberate ourselves from our own self-recriminations, we liberate ourselves from hating others. Because hating others is also a form of enslavement. Which brings us to the other resonance of Paro's name. Embedded within it is the word lehafria. Lehafria, to disrupt, to break down, to turn our assumptions about others and how we relate to them on their heads. We learn from the Pesach Seder night that's described in our Parsha that the work of creating holiness is not just about putting ideas and people and actions into clear and manageable and relatable categories. This is good and this is bad. This is right and this is wrong. You are good and you are bad. No. The work of holiness is also about disrupting and reimagining those categories. My friend, my colleague, Rabbi Mike Moskowitz, sees Pesach summoning us to enhance our moral vision, especially in dark places, like when we search for chametz, Erev Pesach, by candlelight, straining to see beyond the superficial, rejecting the names, the appearances, the labels that obscure human complexity and identity, that of our own and that of others. So what are we to make of these profound contradictions between what so many of us feel is the moral clarity of this moment of self-defense and this call to continue to see hope even in the eyes of our enemies? How in the world are we supposed to reconcile this? And I ask you that question not rhetorically. I stand here with that teaching in my heart and in my mind, and I don't know what to make of it any more than you do. But I will tell you this. When I ask myself, how do we resolve the tension between pledging to eliminate as best we can the forces of evil in this world, not just for the sake of Medinat Yisrael, but for the sake of the world itself? How do we do that and also stay open to the possibility for goodness that we have to keep believing exists in every human being? When I ask myself, how do I hold these both together? I'm reminded too that the Seder is all about contradictions. That matzah is both the bread of affliction and the bread of freedom. It is a bread that we cover and uncover and cover and uncover. That charoset is the symbol of bricks of excruciating, punishing suffering, and yet there's a sweetness. After all is said and done, reflecting on the Exodus, the Torah, later in the book of Devarim, reminds us, Lo tita'ev adomi ki achichahu, Lo tita'ev mitzri ki ger hayita be'artza. Don't hate an Edomite, for they are your kin. Don't hate an Egyptian, for you were a stranger in their land. Don't hate those who hate you. Maybe the hardest mitzvah of all. Don't hate those who hate you. That's the ultimate freedom. To stop hating. To see people in more expansive ways. To believe not just in the miracle of the birth of a human being, but the miracle of the rebirth of a human being. And to do this all while continuing to defend and protect our country and our people. We are commanded to bring those who inflict pain and suffering to justice and to see all people as having the potential to good. However, this lesson is so important because we cannot forget that in the battle to defend and protect our bodies and our physical safety, we also have to defend and protect our moral and spiritual safety. Ki ani hichbadati et lev paro, for I have dignified Paro's heart. I'll leave you to wrestle with this text and the way that I will end continuing to wrestle. But in an effort to just offer some measure of hope in what you take away with you, I want to close with another teaching that has shaped me in many profound ways. It's a teaching of Rav Soloveitchik's, who noted how every human being is made up of disparate and often conflicting pieces. We have values, we have ideals, we have dreams, we have beliefs, we have impulses, and we have desires that oftentimes clash with each other, the way these two positions that I've been talking about clash with each other. The Rav taught that our task in life as human beings is not to seamlessly fit each of these pieces into each other as some kind of ideal puzzle where the edges all flatten and seamlessly come together. But rather, the Rav taught our lesson is to learn to hold the different pieces of who we are in one indivisible, singular embrace of ourselves, in one singular acceptance of ourselves. And if we can picture the jagged edges of those pieces that of course don't fit together but come as close as possible, we can see the space in between their borders. And in their borders, in that space, said the Rav, is where the Shekhinah, is where the divine presence dwells. And that is the only way that we can make room for the divine in our lives, particularly in this moment, not by forcing those pieces to fit snugly with each other, leaving no room for anyone or anything else, but by giving the inevitable conflicts that we feel inside of us some room to breathe, and in that space, allowing in the ultimate breath of the divine. This is the shalom that we strive for, the peace made not by the absence of conflict, but the peace born of wholeness, of shlemut, and of unity, personal, psychological, spiritual, and social. And this is the Yerushalayim that we yearn for. When we pray, when we relive our exodus from Egypt, that narrow, dark, dangerous place where we continue to find ourselves, and pray as we do, L'shana ha'ba'a b'Yerushalayim habnuya, may we next year find ourselves in a restored Yerushalayim. We pray not for just the city of Jerusalem, but for a particular state of being, within ourselves, within the Jewish people, within our country, within humanity, and yes, within Israel. A state of being where we can live courageously and confidently, accepting the manifold beauty and the tragic burdens of the human story, and carry them in one humble, single, loving, merciful, and dignified embrace. Thank you for your patience today for this extended Torah. Shabbat Shalom.